welcome to What the Kink, the podcast where we talk about all the juiciest, kinkiest, and most interesting parts of the sexual world. I'm your illustrious Australian host, Venus, and today I'm joined by Raven, the baddest bitch you're ever gonna meet.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us today, Raven. Why don't you tell us an interesting fact about you?
An interesting fact about me.
I put her on the spot just now.
Jesus Christ. I have a performing arts degree, which means I'm really good at faking things when it matters.
Oh my God. You know, read into that what you will. We're going to move swiftly on. So today, oh my God, Raven. Today we're going to be looking at what is BDSM and looking to break down the acronym and a little bit more about the kink world, what it is we're going to be talking about on this podcast, try and make it flow a little bit. We're new to this. So what is BDSM? What is your understanding of what BDSM is?
My understanding of BDSM is a wide, I mean, you can break it down into the simple acronym itself, but it just goes so much beyond that. It's like it describes almost every little filthy, wonderful thing you can encompass just in this big giant community of filth and wonder. And like I don't know, like BDSM to me isn't just the standard definition. It describes a community. It describes a way of life. It describes, you know, it's an umbrella term for general filth.
I love that. Well, I mean, there is a specific definition technically.
Yes.
But you're very right in that it's a really wide world.
It's evolved. It's not just like, you know, four things anymore. It's
My
evolved.
brain just went, it's evolved. And
Evolved.
I don't know why I'm like the way I'm like, and I wish I wasn't.
It's the Charles Darwin of filth.
Oh, God. Yeah, we're setting the tone here. Excellent. So if we look at the acronym itself of BDSM, we're looking at a couple of overlapping terms of bondage, discipline, domination and submission, and sadism and masochism. So it can be covered, we're going to cover this in more depth later. We're going to go into the different elements of what, you know, domination, submission can look like, and Raven will be joining me for some of those.
I certainly will.
You'll get used to her comedy.
Yeah, you'll want me back, don't worry.
Everybody always does. BDSM within itself does technically have a definition within bondage, discipline, domination, submission, sadism, and masochism. So those are the kind of words that are attached to that acronym. But it's obviously, as Raven put it, a wider world of understanding, and it can be a way of life. It can be something you dabble in, or it can be something you really throw yourself into. So we look at domination and submission as the kind of thing that people come across in the media.
Yeah.
You know, who's the dom and who's the sub, you know?
Yeah.
How do you define?
A dominant and a submissive.
Yeah.
The dominant for me is the one, I want to say controlling, but like as we'll, you know, I'm sure we'll be touched on, you know, any good relationship knows it's the bottom or the submissive.
Because at the end of the day, as the person who's in control and the dominant, I can set as many rules as I like. But if the submissive revokes consent,
exactly,
there's nothing.
You know, we'll have to expand on that a lot more later. For me, it's a dynamic of, it's basically who wears the pants in the relationship, but a little bit more spicy, you know? So you're wearing the spicy pants. Who wears the chaps in the relationship? Or not necessarily the relationship, because you could be in a relationship with someone and your day-to-day life has nothing to do with BDSM. Like you might be a dominant and a submissive in the bedroom or at parties, but then in your day-to-day life it could completely flip, or it could not exist at all. So
and then you've got the opposite end of the scale,
where there is a 24/7, this is our lifestyle, we live this way all the time. But for me, the dominant is generally the one, like, I'm going to use the word calling the shots, like just putting, you know, with consent, calling the shots. The submissive is the one taking the orders, being, you know, bottoming, you know, oh God, my mouth. Why can't I make words happen today?
It's Friday. It is Friday, and I've not yet had a glass of wine, so maybe that's it.
Yeah, and generally as well, even just taking away being in control, like the dominant to me is a caregiver. A dominant is a caregiver, and a submissive is something to be nurtured and looked after, almost like, you know, like not in a weird way, but like a child. You know, it's like someone you look after, and then it's a caregiving relationship. And the dominant is the caregiver.
And there's a lot of different complexities to dominance and submission, and you do get caregiver dominance whose entire kind of MO is to be the person who cares for the submissive, and that's what I'm like in my relationship completely, and I live it 24/7.
And being the dominant for me as well does not necessarily mean being like the one it doesn't necessarily mean impact, or it doesn't necessarily mean you're the one calling the shots during sex all the time. Being a dominant is more taking on a role of being a leader.
A leader is a really good way of putting it, I think, because not all doms identify with the caregiving, or they don't all identify with nurturing, but all of them would, I would say, identify with being a leader in that respect.
Yeah.
But when we talk about, dominance and submission, a lot comes from that submissive and the way that they like to be treated, the kind of submission that they like to put themselves into. Yeah. And there's lots of different ways to submit to people.
I mean, you could be in a dom-sub relationship where, consensually, of course, you get, say your dom-sub dynamic is every Thursday night you get put on a cross and you have a heavy impact session that leaves you with bruises and cuts and
Which
marks.
we'll definitely cover.
Yeah. Or your type of submission could be you like to get tickled. And, every Thursday night you have a tickle session and you're the submissive for that. Like, being a dominant or a submissive isn't a sliding scale of violence or, consensual violence or, lack thereof. It's different for everyone, and it's almost impossible to define what a dominant and a submissive is because it varies so much between people and couples and partners and everyone.
And it's interesting that you talk about, impact play and sort of pain and violence and, all of that kind of thing, because we do see in the BDSM acronym we've got sadism and masochism. So we see the sadomasochism side of BDSM, and a sadist, in very simple terms, is somebody who derives pleasure from inflicting pain. Mm-hmm. A masochist is the opposite, somebody who derives pleasure from receiving pain.
Yeah.
Now, that's also very, very covered in the media, which we're going to have a couple of episodes talking about kink in the media, because if you think you've come here to learn about 50 Shades of Grey,
leave.
No, don't leave. Please stay.
Don't leave. Please stay and learn.
Please stay and learn why you shouldn't take that as an example. Now, we see sadism and masochism because we talk about being spanked, or we talk about, floggers and whips and canes.
And those
whips and chains excite me.
They sell it honey bidet, like the stuff they sell in the naughty section in the bras and things.
And we also see that in bondage, you can buy your handcuffs at bras and things and honey bidet, or, I'm not sure about other countries. We are speaking for Australia here, but like in the UK, for example, at Ann Summers, you can get all the kinky things without any of the information that comes with it and any of the deep levels of consent and understanding that come with that.
It's very rare that you'll go into a sex shop or something that sells impact or, even just any sort of toys and have a warning label being like, don't hit people in the kidneys with this,
which we could really use.
Yeah, we could really use that. Like, don't poke me in the back.
Yeah. So,
that's fine.
Sadism and masochism is something that has to be played with very, very carefully, because pain, of course, is impact on the human body, and the human body has nerve endings and organs and bones and joints.
That is another huge part of being a dominant. Like, you cannot call yourself a dominant if you're not taking care of your partner.
You need to be in that position of responsibility, understanding, and knowledge.
And you can't call yourself a submissive unless you need to be able to recognize your limits and know when to stop things.
Yeah, and so that's something that I really want to touch on right away. Our next episode is going to be completely on consent and safety, but for here, I just like the good stuff. And honestly, if you're intending to skip that episode, then please just don't come back, because that is the most important part of all of this. Now, especially in dominance and submission, in sadism and masochism, in any sort of bondage where we're restrained or tied down, it's really important to know your limits, know your partner's limits, and understand how to revoke those limits.
Yes.
Now, we will touch on things like safe words and safe movements in the next episode, but what it's important... Colours, the colour system. Yep. It's really important to understand, going straight into any of this, that consent is very, very important.
Yeah.
Safety is very, very important. And there is absolutely no tolerance for shirking any of that.
No.
And any decent BDSM community or any person involved in the kink world will tell you exactly the same thing.
I would make a very strong recommendation if there's anyone listening who is thinking of getting into BDSM, even if you're not looking to get into heavy impact, like if you're looking to be a rope bunny or a rigger, or even if you're just looking to do sensory play or candles or anything like that, to have a very good understanding of the human body and where you just should not touch. You don't want to find out where you can't hit by having to go to the hospital because you've seriously injured yourself.
BDSM is no longer fun when somebody's dying.
Yeah, it's not. It's really not. And not that I want to kink shame, that's your fetish, that's your fetish. But you need to have a really, really solid understanding of the human body. You need to know that if, for example, you're flogging someone, you shouldn't hit their spine, watch the back of their neck, ways to have your submissive stand. Or if you are a submissive and you're working with a potentially inexperienced dominant, maybe just putting that hand over the back of your neck. So, to cover look after yourself.
You should have a strong enough relationship where you can discuss these things
Yep.
before play.
Yep.
Never play without having had a discussion. And that's something that we're going to pressure all the way through. So is the consent thing. You'll hear us talk about it pretty much constantly. There's no episode where consent isn't going to come into this. So I wanted to touch on that really briefly. I want to move on as well to what kind of kink is.
Yep.
And kink is a very, very broad term, and it can be a very inclusive experience. It's not limited to one set of people that can enjoy kink. It's not limited to a gender, a sexuality, a race, any sort of relationship structure. Yeah. It's well presented in a lot of sectors of the community, and it isn't for any one group.
Yeah. It's not, I mean, stereotypically, like if you look at a lot of pride parades and things like Mardi Gras, like kink and the LGBT community go hand in hand. Like there's a lot of people wearing, puppy masks for example, but kink does not belong to the LGBT community. It doesn't belong to the, straight community. It doesn't belong to anyone. Kink is for everyone.
And there's a lot of crossover, obviously. Queer people are often kinky, and kinky people are often queer, and then queer people are often polyamorous, and then polyamorous people are often kinky. And it crosses over, and that's why I'm covering all of the bits and pieces here. But that doesn't mean it belongs to any one person. And this experience in this world can be really freeing and really fun. Really fucking fun.
And you should make sure you never let anyone tell you whether you're kinky or not. If you think something you like's a bit kinky, don't let someone shit on you for it. Like, just, you might be on the 98% vanilla and just have that little 2% that you enjoy doing something weird. You should never let anyone tell you that that's not good enough. Like, there's no such thing as being too kinky or not kinky enough.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting you've used the word vanilla. Now, just to define that in case you haven't come across it, vanilla is the blanket term used for quote-unquote non-kinky sex, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Everyone loves vanilla ice cream.
Everybody does.
All love some good vanilla.
Do I want to throw pop rocks and fucking concrete on my ice cream? Yes. But if you want to eat
set the ice cream on fire? Yes.
Oh my God. So there's no shame around being vanilla in this world.
Absolutely none.
And there's not a certain level of kinky that you have to be or whatever to be a part of the community. And if you do come across that, you need to call it out because there's a lot of, we suffer a lot in this community with being othered from the rest of the world. There's a lot of stigma attached, and we don't need that within our worlds. No. It's the same in, the queer community when we erase certain sexualities for not being the right type of sexuality.
That being said, there is one thing that's probably important to note about kink is that there is a time and place for kink.
And so that balances back to consent, doesn't it? Yeah, you don't ever want to involve people in kink if they haven't said that they want to be involved in it.
Yes, so your fetish is your fetish and you need to be, or your kink is your kink, and you need to be situationally aware of how and when you're presenting that kink. Just because you like to be led around on a leash by your partner dressed as a donkey with a, one of those plug tails in your butthole doesn't mean the kids at the park want to see that.
So you speak from experience.
God, no. If I did, I'd probably still be traumatized. That's my origin story.
Oh, no. Okay, so it's interesting. You used the word kink and fetish there. Let's look at a little bit the definitions.
Yes.
Do you know the difference?
Oh, man. See, here's the thing. Like, I'm a little bit terrible with this stuff.
That's okay.
My understanding of kink and fetish is that a kink is something outside the norm, like something you would call outside normal, and a fetish is more, I'm going to say more object based. But so for me, when I think of a fetish, I think of toes, I think of I think of people fucking cars. This
people
is really terrible.
People do that.
I have no judgment for anyone who does anything. I think of
consent. Can a car consent?
That's another whole. Just next time, next episode, can mechanical objects consent?
So you've really hit the nail on the head there. We've got kink being defined as an activity outside of the quote unquote again sexual norm.
Yeah.
Or a fetish being an object or material that is arousing and also outside of the norm. So if you like boobs, perhaps that's not a fetish because boobs are a regularly sexualized object. However, if you like feet or shoes and you fetishize that object, you find that sexually arousing, that's more of a fetish.
Yeah.
When you look at the thing of kink, kind of experiences, you might, if you enjoy vaginal sex as a person with a vagina, you probably wouldn't consider that a kink.
Yeah.
But if you enjoy double penetration, you might consider that a kink. Maybe. Now, it is up to your own definitions and what you consider kinky and not kinky. As a particularly kinky person, I'm looking at it like double penetration sounds like a Thursday night.
I love that. There's a lot of things happening on Thursday nights.
Why is it always Thursday nights?
I don't know. It's nearly the end of the week. You need that extra little oomph to get you through to Friday.
You know, I had a friend here the other day and she was like, I've been invited for a threesome tomorrow night, but it's Thursday. And I'm like, so you can't have a threesome on a Thursday? It's free threesome. Yeah.
Yes. I find that fetish and kink are another they go hand in hand. They blend together, and like, you know, no one's going to come screaming after you for being like, that's not a fetish, that's a kink, you know, like
absolutely not.
Your own definition is important as well.
So it's actually important as well for us to cast over the fact that kink and fetish and BDSM is not always sexual.
No.
So for some people, and in fact you'll meet one of my closest friends, Pearl, in another episode about platonic kink, it is completely platonic. There's no sex, there's no clothes coming off, it's not about genitals. It's just about experience.
Yes.
And experience of submission or dominance or experience of bondage. Some people enjoy just rope in a non-sexual way. Some people enjoy impact in a non-sexual way. And that's absolutely fine too.
Yes. And that's, you know, it doesn't go hand in hand. And that's another thing to know. And I'm sure you'll cover this in your consent episode, that just because someone's consented to do a play with you doesn't mean they're going to have sex with you.
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa. Just because someone has sex with you doesn't mean you can like whip out a flogger in the middle of sex and smack them with it. You know, like it's like
there's been a really popular TikTok. Oh my God, I'm referencing TikTok.
Oh, Lord.
There's been a very popular TikTok going around where it's like, if you're going to tell me you're kinky, then don't be shocked when I pull out knives during sex. And I'm like, I should be shocked if we didn't discuss it beforehand.
Yeah, that's bad behaviour.
Yeah, and so that kind of stigma is the kind of thing that we're trying to break down. That wrong idea about what kink can look like.
I can give you a personal experience of a kink.
Go for it.
So I went to a party about a year ago now, and I've always had a fascination, just, you know, as a little trigger warning, if you've got a problem with blood, maybe skip ahead 40 seconds or so. So I did a play with needles, where I had 27 needles put in my upper thigh.
I love needles.
That was not arousing to me. It was not... I didn't get pleasure out of that. It's not something I would want to do during sex. For me, it was me pushing my body.
You just wanted to try
I just wanted to do it. I just wanted to see the 27 needles in my leg, because the last time I did it, I got 7 and I fainted. So I wanted to push myself. I wanted to see what I could do. I wanted to do something, you know, quote unquote taboo. And I did. And it was really satisfying and enjoyable. And I still needed aftercare and I still needed love from that. But it was not sexual in any way whatsoever.
I hear you use that word aftercare. That's something we're going to be touching on. So there's a lot of emotional, physical, mental difficulties even, or challenges that come with dominance and submission in any form. So any of this kind of kink world, it's really important to understand that sometimes you're going to need a little bit afterwards.
Yes.
A sit down and talk or a cuddle or that kind of thing 100%. To kind of diffuse yourself from that situation.
Yeah, and you might just need a glass of water, like making sure whoever you're playing with, whether it be you're dominant or you're submissive, making sure they're hydrated.
Making sure, and that's something that should be part of your pre-discussion is what do you need afterwards? What do you usually need? What do you find that you need? And we'll do an episode on that. We're going to do an episode on subspace, because the space that some people get into as a submissive can make it quite difficult for them to communicate after a scene. And we're also going to talk about aftercare and, you know, establishing boundaries within that and working out what your needs are as well as what your partner's needs are. So that's something that's really important to understand. We've touched a bit on consent and legality, remembering that every single state is different.
Yes.
Everywhere you're from is going to have slightly different laws around the age of consent. And just because you know the age of the consent for quote unquote standard sex, you might not know the age of consent for BDSM. For example, I know in our state, it's age 16 for regular sex, as long as the other person is 17. Unless the other person is only if the other person's 17, then it's 17 for regular sex, and then it's 18 for anal.
Oh, I love that. That's
18 for anal. Because my butt needs to wait. He's not mature yet.
Happy 18th birthday. Have some anal sex.
I mean...
Love that. Thursday night?
Thursday night. That's going to be an ongoing thing now.
Love it.
Thursday night, anal sex. Oh, well, not until you're 18. So make sure...
Thirsty Thursdays.
Thirsty Thursday? Maybe I should release this on Thursdays.
Yes. I love that. What did you do on Thursday night?
Well...
Anal sex and recorded a podcast.
Anal sex and recorded... You know what? I love that. So just make sure that before you go any further in exploring your world of kink, whatever level you want to explore that at, even if you're just listening to this for fun, that you have a look at the laws in your state, look at the laws in your area, and make sure you have a really good understanding of consent.
Yes. Also make sure, because there are some like play equipments, things like giant hunting knives. Make sure that you're not going to get in trouble taking that giant hunting knife into a venue or other space where you're going to be playing.
Yeah.
If you were invited to a public party, check in with the organisers. Make sure you can bring your bow and arrow for, sexual purposes or, kink purposes or whatever you want to bring it for. Don't just rock up with a weaponry in your bag without having checked first.
It's really important.
It is very important
to be safe.
Because if you get arrested because you got a hunting knife, there's going to be some problems.
And look, we're not here to kink shame. And now that's a word that you're going to come across a lot. And it kind of speaks for itself when somebody or some group has a certain prejudice or negativity towards any one kink. As long as your kink is consensual and everybody's happy with it.
And it's not harming people around you.
Yeah, harming people that don't,
Because that's, again, a lack of consent. If you're involving people in your play that don't want to be involved in your play, that's a lack of consent.
Exactly. So
consent isn't just between the people who are involved, especially if it's in a public setting.
Yeah.
There's a splash zone.
That's really important. I've got that in the consent episode talking about who needs to consent to things. Exactly. And look, I always live on the mantra, don't yuck someone else's yum.
Oh, yeah, that's nice.
That's good, yeah. It's easy to remember that just because, you might think olives are delicious and I think they're disgusting. If you want to eat olives, and as long as you're not forcing them down my throat,
that's fine.
We just need to understand that just because something isn't for us, it is for someone. Exactly. And they have every right to consensually indulge in that.
Yes.
And if you don't want to see it, then don't see it. If you can find the world of kinky porn on the internet, you can find the world of kink on various different kink websites and groups. If you don't want to engage in that, don't engage in that. Yeah. And don't tell that person that they can't just because it isn't your thing.
On the other side of that as well, just because someone else has a kink doesn't mean you have to have a kink. That their kink might not be your kink, and you never have to feel pressured to involve yourself in even a loved one. You don't have to feel pressured. If I can give another personal example, if that's okay.
Go for it.
My partner is a little, and I'm sure that'll be touched on.
We've got an episode on that coming.
He involves himself in a certain type of kink that I have zero interest in. I don't, it's not something I would ever do. It's not something that I want in my life, but I'm more than happy to support him with that and look after him and love him when he needs it. And I will always support that, but I will never involve myself with it. And you can have relationships like that and make them work. You don't have to be on the same page 100% with everything you do.
And that's why my partner and I, for example, explore polyamory. We're in an open relationship because I've got some kinks that don't interest him whatsoever. And if I were to put any pressure on him whatsoever to do them, that would be unethical and non-consensual. Yeah. So I go and I play with other people in that way. And we'll explore non-monogamy and the different formats it can take, and especially in relation to kink in later episodes. But the last thing I kind of want to touch on is the stigma that is attached to being kinky.
Yeah.
If you've listened to my intro episode, you'll know that I essentially lost the support of my entire family because I was kinky. And sure, there's more layers to it than that, but I've lost a lot of friends and people in my life because I'm a kinkster. Now, for me, looking in my logical brain, I go, well, what the fuck? Yeah. I'm doing something consensual with adults that we enjoy, and it doesn't affect you in any way whatsoever unless you choose it to.
I don't judge you for going rock climbing every weekend.
For me, that's how I explained it to my parents at one point. I was like, this is a hobby that I really enjoy. I don't judge you for playing golf, and I find that boring and weird. It's, at the end of the day, people are going to tell you that this is freaky or weird. Some people might tell you that you're going to go to hell. It's not true. Because as long as you're doing everything consensually, then you're not breaking any rules.
No.
And it's your bedroom or it's your life. Nobody has to be involved with it, I don't ask about my parents' sex life, so why does it matter that they want to hear about mine,
Exactly.
So you're going to come across it.
Exactly, yeah. And it's, as long as you're keeping yourself because there's also this, like, I will touch on something briefly. Sometimes there can be a blurred line between, you know, using kink to satisfy yourself and using kink to harm yourself.
And we'll talk about that.
Yeah. You need to make sure you're keeping yourself safe. So, you know, people may be worried for you if you're walking around with, like, the word slut carved into your shoulder. Like, people may be worried for you, but as long as you can assure yourself and the people around you that it was consensual, that you enjoyed it, that it has benefited you, that it's something you wanted, then it's none of their business.
Yeah, it does not affect people. And, you know, that's what we were talking about before. It's important not to expose people to kink where they don't want to be. Like, people might, if you want to mention it, you just say, I partake in BDSM. And if they'd have the option to say, oh, like what? Or they have the option to say, no, thank you, you keep that to yourself.
Not my thing. And often I find with my more, you know, quote unquote vanilla friends is that it all comes out when we're drunk. I'm the one that was like, hey, I just dropped my real name. That they'll be like, hey, Raven, like, tell me what you just did. You know,
what did you do on Thursday night?
What did you do on Thursday night? Because they will see the bruise or the hickey, or they're like, you'd be surprised the amount of questions you get just because you got a hickey, and like people don't do that. Like, oh, that's scandalous. And I'm like, you want to see my ass cheeks? You know, like it's great. And like often I've got a lot of curiosity, and I've got a lot of friends who support me with it, and they'll never do it themselves, and they're not interested.
And that's why we're here.
That's why we're here. Like,
to teach you, to let you be exposed to it in a safe way, that you're not having to see my genitals to hear about what I like having my genitals exposed to.
Well, can I also add as well that this podcast, like, I'm not the founder of this, but
Mistress Venus.
I can assume that this podcast is not just for kinky people. This is for everyone. Like, you could be the most vanilla bean in the world and still listen to this if you're curious. This podcast is not just for kinksters, it's for everyone.
Because, as I said in my intro, if my parents had a bit more information about what polyamory and kink was, then maybe I wouldn't be here right now. It does not hurt you to learn about a sector of the community.
It doesn't.
It cannot hurt you at all to know anything about this. Like, not even a little bit.
None.
So,
like, absolutely not.
Welcome, you know?
Yeah.
This is our world, and we're going to give you some resources. There's lots of places to go where you can look around, and every episode I'll give you some resources that you can go follow up some more information online, and you can reach out to us at different places. I'm on Twitter at What the Kink Podcast, on Instagram at What the Kink Podcast, on Facebook What the Kink Podcast. You know, nobody else had it, would you believe?
Really?
I'm surprised. So look, reach out to us. Thank you so much for coming in today, Raven.
Can I add one more thing before
Oh my god, she's got one more thing.
I've got an important thing to add, and then we can wrap up. I feel like you've sort of been like the good angel and I've been the bad angel, where
she's
you've
always
been
a bad
like
angel.
You've been like this amazing thing, and I've turned around and gone, but it's important to know things from both sides. So here's one of my mottos to live by. So while it is okay, kink is amazing and wonderful and no one should judge you for it, kink is not an excuse to be an asshole.
Yes.
Now, kink, just because personal experience, I've had partners before that have used kink as an excuse to take out anger on me, to take out violence on me. That is not
Did somebody say 50 Shades of Grey?
Yes. And I'm sure Mistress Venus will go into more detail about this in later episodes, but kink does not equal being a shit.
Yes.
You do not get to injure people and hurt people emotionally or physically.
And call it kink.
And
the other thing is understanding that this isn't something you can just do with anybody. I can't walk into somebody at a kink party and say, hey, beat me up.
No.
And I'm not going to start calling somebody daddy the day I meet them. That there's a lot of dynamics that come to this, and there's nobody has any right to anything just because you're a kinky person. So that's a really, really solid, firm note to end on. That's really important. Remember what I said about consent.
Consent. It'll be mentioned every episode, I assume.
Yes. You're going to get sick of it, but if you get real sick of it, I don't care.
If you get sick of consent, then you shouldn't.
Then don't.
You don't get sick of consent.
Consent's so pretty. It is my pet. Like, I love consent. I love talking about consent. I've got 3 pages on consent to run you through. So I've already rattled off the socials that you can find us on. Do reach out. At the moment, we are still able to reply to everybody, so we're more than happy to have a chat. And you'll be able to find some of our guest speakers popping in with their own usernames. I'm sure they'll be around.
And then forgetting that they're using, usernames and saying their own name and having to edit it out later.
Yes, we did have to do that. So excellent. Thank you so much for listening today. We'll catch you next Thursday for...
See you next Thursday!
For... Cunt. We're going to be uploading every Thursday for Thirsty Thursdays. We're going to paint something. We've made something. And most of all, remember everybody, stay kinky.
Stay kinky.